thought that Vanderbilt would have a shot at going undefeated in the month of September, but that's what happens when you throw a little bit of Diego Pavia power in the mix. Starting off 2-0 after a 55-0 win against Alcorn State, and now they got a shot to play Georgia State. Will the Commodores keep their winning streaks alive, or will the Panthers find a way to pull off the upset? What's going on, SEC Unfiltered? He's Dave Shumate. I'm Cole Thompson, breaking down everything you need to know heading into the matchup this upcoming Saturday. Real quickly, make sure that you hit the subscribe button down below. This is your new home for all things SEC. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Follow us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. Follow Dave on Twitter, at Mock10Sports. Follow me on Twitter, at Mr. Cole Thompson. And to check out all of our great work, make sure that you visit SECUnfiltered.com. This episode of SECU is brought to you by RHOBACK. Look good, feel good this upcoming fall on game days by using the promo code SECU for 20% off all joggers, polos, hoodies, shorts, much, much more. You want to feel good on game days. You want to dress the nine. Do so with RHOBACK and use the promo code SECU. Tell them the fine folks at SEC Unfiltered sent you. Dave, Pavia Power is rocking. The Commodores are rolling. This is a complete 180 version of the team that we thought we were going to see in Nashville. And honestly, they have to be feeling pretty high and mighty coming off of a 55-0 win over Alcorn State. But the difference in this game was they won at every single level. Passing, defensively, on the ground. Special teams came to play. A punt return for a touchdown. This was the complete performance that you want to see before the start of SEC play.
Yeah, Clark Lee's going to hate this because we're still in a line from our guy Nick Saban rat poison. But if you get through this game, you set up a potential SEC game of the week next week in Columbia and Como at Fairhope Field. I mean, you're waiting when they announce the game time. It's either, 2:30, 3:15 on ESPN, ESPN2. I have to look at it. So I know the time slot. But you have a big showdown against Missouri. I mean, you could have Missouri coming in. They'll definitely probably be in the top 25, rolling in, assuming they beat Boston College. Me and Cole previewed that one if you want to go check that one out as well. But it's a big opportunity. This is a big game. When I was doing some research on this game, it kind of feels like it was similar to Vanderbilt's UNLV game last year. They went and played at Allegiant Stadium. They needed it. They were favored, similar to this game. They're going to play at Georgia State at the old Turner Field where the Braves play. In a game they should win. First-year head coach Dell McGee for Georgia State. They're not bad. They're going to have some athletes, but this isn't a game, if you're Vanderbilt, you can be looking ahead to your trip next week to come. You're good. You're better this year for sure. But I still don't think you're to that point. And I think Clark Lee will be the first guy to admit it too. We can't look ahead to our first conference game. I know we want to. The work we put in already has allowed us to be in this position. But, guys, we can't look ahead. This needs to be our Super Bowl this week, heading on the road, facing a team it's going to feel like they probably don't have a lot to lose, really, just because they get an SEC team coming to play at their house. It's not normal at Georgia State. Just practice needs to be good this week. They need to be locked in. Do not be looking ahead to Como next week. That would be my only concern if I'm Clark Lee really rolling into this matchup.
Two things can be true. Number one, this is a much revamped version and a new era of Commodore football. But number two is that you can't allow yourself to get complacent before the big games. And this, of course, is going to be one of them. Kickoff at 6 p.m. You said Turner Field. They call it Center Park Stadium these days. It is going to be a really intriguing game. Dell McGee comes from the background of Kirby Smart. We all know what he has been able to do out in Athens. Now he's with Georgia State. Had a slugfest at first against Georgia Tech, and then, of course, we know what happened a week later, 24-21 victory over the Mocs of Chattanooga, which also was eviscerated by Tennessee. So you don't feel too confident, but you also realize this is still Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt has been susceptible to falling underneath the pressure. Looking at last game, you saw Chris Velo have 2 touchdown passes, 238 yards. They averaged 4.4 yards on the ground. Defensively, they got 2 turnovers via the pick. So there are some things to like about Georgia State. But the thing that we can talk about is more so Dell McGee's culture standpoint. He is a no-nonsense type of mental guy. He knows how to get players waking up for big-time games because he did so when he was out in Athens for the last several years. But the question turns to, with this game being in your backyard, with the ability to have that SEC marquee win on your schedule, and everyone truly counts, but whether or not it's a Sun Belt win or not, this is a game where if you're looking at this from the Panthers standpoint, it's just about setting the tone and get yourself right.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. I remember watching them play Georgia Tech a little bit. Now, it was somewhat of a sleeper game for Georgia Tech. They were coming off the trip to Dublin after they beat Florida State. But Georgia State was competitive. The score was probably a little close. I mean, the game was probably a little closer than the score indicated. But last week, they kind of came back to earth a little bit. They're probably somewhere in the middle, this Georgia State team. It's not a team you can sleep on. You can just go roll the balls out and, hey, well, let's get through this. Let's get on the bus. Let's get back to Nashville. Let's go get ready for our first conference game. It's a game you're going to have to go play well in. You can't go turn the football over. And again, Vanderbilt hadn't shown signs of that. It's just you don't want it to come to fruition this week. That's really – before breaking down Georgia State's entire roster, it's just I think this week has to do more about Vanderbilt. I would expect a decent Vanderbilt crowd in Atlanta. It's not a far trip. I mean, better traveled road games, I would assume. But no, I think overall, Vanderbilt just needs to lock in this week. That's my big concern. Just it screams the UNLV game last year that they let get away from them late. And it's kind of the downturn of the season. It felt like a must-win last year. Feels like this one needs to be about because I think if Vanderbilt wins this one, I think you would agree, Cole. They're going to go 4-0 in non-con because I think they get another MAC team and maybe
They get Ball State, so that'll be one that we don't have to worry about.
If they win this, they're 4-0 in conference and they're sitting there chomping at the bit, being like, "Can we go get 2 conference wins somewhere? Can we? We don't need to break that down, but that just is kind of what you're playing for this week. You're 4-0 in non-conference. You're staring at that right in the face, and obviously." You're going to be talked about from a national standpoint next week if you were to win this game. But we got to we can't look past Saturday. Really can't look past today's practice, but you can't look past Saturday when you're playing Georgia State and Del McGee. You're right. That's really what I would hammer home is just the locking in on, hey, this team competed with Georgia Tech, guys, and they're a pretty solid ACC team. They can certainly play with us if we're not playing our best.
Keeping that day one mentality, win the day, not win the matchup week is probably a big deal for Clark Lee and company. The one thing I will say is, this was the easiest bet of the year, hammering the over on wins for the Commodores, simply because Diego Pavia power is rocking and rolling up. 2.5 wins? Yeah, 100%. It was one of those games where you feel very confident if you are a Commodore fan because this is a quarterback that last year held his own against an SEC team with lesser competition. The good news is that he has a relationship with Tim Beck. They also brought a ton of other talents from New Mexico State over to Nashville. So it was a very cohesive move for number 2 to be the number 1 guy. Here's the one thing that you have to wonder about if you are facing Georgia State. What version of the run defense are you going to get, especially with the options that you utilize a guy like Pavia in? So against Georgia Tech, Haynes King was one of the top runners in that game. He averaged 5.4 yards per play. They allowed 6.6 yards on the ground. Last week against the Mocs, it was only 2.6 yards. And there's a level of competition that certainly plays a factor into it. But also, I think that we can call a spade and say the level of athletes that you will see in this game if you're Georgia State nearly emulate the ones that you see at Georgia Tech. And that was, again, 6.6 yards and a mobile quarterback. So if you are looking at this from the Commodores' perspective, that Georgia Tech game where you have the ability to win on third down, short yardage situations, and trust your run game, especially with a mobile quarterback, is that kind of what you want to do to set the tone in this one, Dave? Do you just want to have a great rushing attack? And then if you have to throw it, well, Pavia is showing you that he can uncork one. It's not elite, but it is good enough to move the sticks and get you into a third and manageable or even a fresh set of downs.
Yeah, I mean, they got some weapons on the outs. I mean, we've talked about Quincy Skinner, Junior Sherrill. They got some guys who can go win. But you're right. I think Vanderbilt needs to be good at what they're good at. And I appreciate it now in hindsight. It's easy to say. But when Clark Lee, he took over the defense, and then he kind of went and zigged while everybody else zagged a little bit. Like, hey, we can't go run some spread type offense at Vanderbilt. A lot of people run that stuff. We got to go be a little different. Let's go be more triple option. We're going into the year we talked about would Diego lead them in rushing? I think Pavia could end up leading them rush. Probably will be. I mean, him or Cedric Alexander. But there was a real shot for the first time at Vanderbilt in a long time the quarterback was going to go lead them in rushing. I think they still stick to that plan because I think that's their bread and butter for this season. But again, I think if Georgia State and Kevin Scherer, the defensive coordinator at Georgia State, who is another guy that's been at Georgia, been at Tennessee, if they start loading the box, I still think Vanderbilt can win on the outside because I think Pavia can throw well enough. I think Quincy Skinner and Junior Sherrill can go make enough plays. So, I think as long as Vanderbilt doesn't turn the ball over and give Georgia State short field position to get themselves in a hole early, where they're say they turn it over real quick, they're down 10-0 right off the bat. They kind of got to start throwing the football a little more, and it's obvious they're throwing the football. That's where they could get in trouble. If they're controlling the game, and I think if they don't turn the football over, Georgia State should control this game. I'm not even ready to say it's going to be a blowout. I think this could be a little closer than we think just because of what's on the horizon next week, and naturally we're human beings. We like to look ahead, and especially with 18 to 22-year-olds. But I think if they you're right, just lay the foundation, turnovers. We can't beat ourselves. If I'm Clark Lee, you talk about that every game, but really when you're the better football team, we can't go beat ourselves. That's what I'd be hammering home for if I'm Clark Lee this week.
One thing that's really important about this Commodores team is that they are aggressive on fourth down. They've been 100% on conversions, but also they are actually right dab smack in the middle. You don't know what to expect on third down conversions. They're at a 50% success rate, and it's a very overall balanced approach. Yes, they like to run the football more than they like to pass, but they do have 11 first downs through the air. What I find so interesting, Dave, that has not been brought up enough this offseason, and really I think that's been the backbone of this team for Vanderbilt, is you got Clark Lee calling plays. You got him back in his element. And we always talk about this because of there's two ways to look at the narrative where if you are a head coach and you're calling the plays, you're kind of waving the white flag in terms of if I'm going down with the ship. It hasn't looked that great for Billy Napier. It's looked really damn good for Clark Lee in a year, especially in the run defense. This is a team that's allowed less than 3 yards per carry. And you think about Georgia State, they can average about 4.6 yards. Freddie Brock, Syvion Wilkerson are their two leading guys, both combining for over 5 yards per play. Only one rushing touchdown on the year. So if you're Georgia State, this might be a game where you have to trust the pass a little bit more, but still, you watch this Kyron Drones had multiple fits going up against this Commodore defense in the secondary.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think path to victory for Georgia State would be testing that Vanderbilt secondary that I think is a little, what's the best way? Lacks a little athleticism, especially from an SEC standpoint. Now, again, they're not playing, and obviously Vanderbilt's not playing an SEC team this week, but I do think there could be some plays to be made there because I mean, you move C.J. Taylor back to safety. He's a linebacker really at heart. Ricky Wright's never been the most athletic guy in the world either. You could get him on probably a double post move, stuff like that. Vanderbilt can be had in the secondary. And again, some of that's not Clark Lee's fault. They lose their better players each year because they can't retain them. So he's got to do it. He's got to maintain what he has for this specific year. I mean, it's obviously just like everybody else. It's year to year, but specifically really for Vanderbilt because you don't know who you have coming back, whether you want them gone or not. But yeah, I would agree. I think Georgia State, if I'm Georgia State and I'm Jim Chaney, another SEC guy, former Tennessee OC, Georgia OC, he's been in Arkansas. He's the OC at Georgia State. I would take shots to the air, hope maybe we get some penalties along the way as well, and that can rack up some yards for us offensively. Again, I don't think you're just going to go run at Vanderbilt. They're solid up front. But secondary, I'm with you. I think that's where you go try to attack if you want to stay in this game because I think they can be had back there just from an overall athletics. There's probably not much difference really from Vanderbilt's skill guys and Georgia State's Vanderbilt's defensive skill guys and Georgia State's receivers, honestly, if we want to be completely honest, from just overall athletic ability.
Alcorn State is completely different than Virginia Tech. Georgia State is also different than Virginia Tech. But keep this in mind. There were multiple explosive plays. You got the Stephen Gosnell big-time game, the Ali Jennings 62-yard score. That was just bad coverage. So you see that there are chinks in the armor that could absolutely lead to this being a lot closer than people expect. Dave, when you and I do a show together, here's what we always like to say. One player that we're monitoring. This is an SEC show, so hate to break it to you, Georgia State fans that are watching this. We're not going to be talking about your guys. We are going to be talking about Vanderbilt. If you're watching for somebody who is it, and I'm just going to put a caveat in this, let's not say Pavia Power because that would be the easy cop out.
No, that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the low-hanging. Let's see. I'm gonna try to go RB2 here. We got Cedric Alexander as RB1. What about guys like Chase Gillespie or a guy like AJ Newberry? Somebody maybe we see they stick to the bread and butter, what makes them different. I love that he hired New Mexico State's offensive coordinator, Tim Beck. They're going to run this spread offense. It's basically a run game, triple option, modern day run game. But again, you hear me talk about it on all the shows we have. I've talked about with Tennessee having to have somebody outside of Dylan Sampson. I just think as the season goes on now, you need another running back. You can lose them so quick. This is the key base of this offense is the run game. I think I want to see something out of AJ Newberry or potentially Chase Gillespie. Chase Gillespie is going into his third year. He's a redshirt sophomore. We need to probably take the load off a little bit off Diego and Cedric Alexander. I'm looking forward to seeing one of those guys kind of take the reins this week.
Miles Capers is one that I would like to see on the defensive line, but I'm going to go with another guy on offense. I feel like that they have to get that established number one receiver at some point. And for me, Tristan Brown, the freshman from Houston, looked really good last week against Alcorn State. 3 catches for 27 yards. I don't know what his role is going to be in this game, but when you have that smaller, shiftier frame, it does benefit you if you're able to win at the point of attack, to create separation, and then be able to absolutely thrive in the open field. That's kind of what Tristan Brown, I think, is at his best. I think if Pavia is looking to go ahead and get a quick strikeout, this is what the guy you turn to. So maybe you see him make that big-time play. We also can look at a guy like Eli Stowers that truly is just a Swiss Army knife of senses. He's not somebody that is just a tight end. He played quarterback. He got that big touchdown pass last week against Alcorn State. And he also was a 4-star quarterback prospect coming out of high school when he went to Texas A&M. So there's a lot of ways to utilize him that I think are going to be beneficial for not just Vanderbilt moving forward, but really in this game just to be able to kind of throw the Panthers off the list. Betting odds are starting at 10.5 in favor of the Commodores. Over/under set at 46. Dave, kickoff is at 6 p.m. Game's going to be on ESPN+, but we're going to give you your opportunity. Are you saying that it's a plus game for the Commodores?
Night game at the TED, baby, as they used to call it with the Braves player. I think just naturally human psychology, human mindset's going to come in here. I think this is a game Vanderbilt's probably not going to play their best. Still better than Georgia State. I think it's kind of a boring game in the second half. I do think Vanderbilt's just going to try to run the football, get out of this. Let's don't get ourselves beat. Let's don't turn the ball over. I'm thinking something Vanderbilt wins this game 30-17. That's the vibe I'm kind of getting. I think they're going to produce on offense. I think the defense is going to give up some explosives. I think Jim Chaney, the OC at Georgia State, is going to put up some good. I think from a passing game standpoint, they're going to have some good schemes going. I think they know Vanderbilt can be had. They faced Vanderbilt numerous times in the times they played in the SEC. They know the lack of athletic ability they have at times. But I think it's going to be something like 30-17, them barely covering. It's right around the point total. And I think Vanderbilt escapes. I shouldn't say escapes. It's not as pretty as obviously the Virginia Tech or Alcorn State games are. And I think they just kind of get ready. They take the bus back to Vanderbilt or back to Nashville, and they're kind of the talk of the SEC next week heading into that big matchup at Fairhope Field.
Listen, there's a great video by Matt Mitchell. We don't work with him, but I just want to give him a huge shout out. He's one of the funniest guys on YouTube, where he talks about the Don of Diego. And I'm going to be completely honest. I am smitten over him. If I was the actual head coach at Thompson Tech Red Wolves, he would have a full-ride scholarship tomorrow. I do think that you will see a bit of a slip-up late in this game. The defense will allow one explosive play, something that you can't afford to do next week in Como, but it's okay against Georgia State. I think Pavia gets back to his winning ways of being able to utilize his legs. I think there's a lot of first down completions. I think you will see him actually throw a little bit more in this game. Maybe not in this third and fourth quarter, but I do think that he will end up throwing a lot in the first half just because of you have to be a dominant, explosive, or more importantly, mixed up various offense if you want to come away with the dub. For me, that's what you got to look for in this game. I think Georgia State makes this interesting in the first half. I think you will see a couple breakaway runs in the third quarter, and then you just kind of coast your way out for an easy victory going into week 4. Go ahead and give me this one. I will also agree with you. I think that they just beat the spread. I'm going to go 34-20 in this game. Just over the line, they go ahead and they hit that 10.5 point marker, but still, you're 3-0. And if you're Vanderbilt, that's the only thing that you're really talking about. And also, maybe the SEC Unfiltered Tour makes a trip over to Como next week. Who would have thought that the Commodores versus the Tigers could be the game of the week in conference play?
Hey, Chris will have a nice spot on the rocks out there in the end zone, baby.
Make sure that you like, rate, review, subscribe, comment down below your score for this upcoming matchup out in Atlanta. Make sure that also you're following us on social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. Download the podcast version of the show. Leave us a 5-star review if you love this type of content and a 1-star review if you hate this type of content. Make sure that you follow Dave on Twitter at Mock10 Sports. Follow me on Twitter at Mr. Cole Thompson. And to check out all of our great work, make sure that you visit SECUnfiltered.com. For Dave Shumate, I'm Cole Thompson. Anchor down, Commodore Nation. Peace.